There are more believers in a Sunday school class in most of our churches than in all of Yemen.
There are 1,000 needs in the world. None compares to this one.
Our God is worthy to receive praise from 6,000 more people groups on the planet.
As followers of Christ, we are commanded to help fulfill the Great Commission. Great Commission found in Mark 16 says, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations, not just your neighborhood, not just your community, not just Iowa, not just this nation, but to all nations. We're in the middle of our sermon series called The Empty Chair. And this chair, this empty chair, represents your neighbor. It represents each nation that does not know the story, the beautiful story of Jesus. There is still 42% of the world who has little to zero access to the gospel. Okay? Zero, meaning I'm not talking about a percentage of the world who has to talk about Jesus behind closed doors because it's, not really appropriate in public, or I'm not talking about those who, have to kind of go behind the scenes to go to church, and there's all these churches, but you just can't really do it on the streets. I'm talking about the 42% of the world who does not know a Christian, who does not have a church. There are still thousands of people groups today who do not have the Bible translated into their native language. Those people represent this empty chair. And so next week, we're going to be taking our annual miracle offering, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But as Radiant Church, we have a heart to see people come to know Jesus and to fulfill the Great Commission. And we all have a role to play. And today you are honored and blessed to hear from a missionary by the name of Tim, who has sacrificed a lot to fulfill the Great Commission. We're going to, I ask that you would not post any clips on social media. We're not going to post his full name for safety concerns and what him and his team are doing in India. So today I just pray that I ask that you would make sure you don't post anything. But he's got an amazing story, and I believe that God's going to use him to encourage us to give God what he has given us in return to fulfill the Great Commission. And so Pastor Brian last week started this with Ann But I'm going to ask that everybody would stand if you are able, because we want to honor those who have been obedient to the calling of dropping their lives, putting their lives on hold, moving across the world so that the Great Commission can be fulfilled. Would you guys please give it up, a warm welcome, and honor our speaker today, Tim. Come on out, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Man, what a privilege it is for me to get to be here in Cedar Rapids this morning. And I woke up and Nate asked me to be here at the service at 9 a.m. And I came out to my car, staying there at the hotel, and it was the frosty window. And I realized I am out of habit. Like, I did not account for a frosty window without a scraper. Now, I'm from Montana, so I'm aware of what frosty window does. And when I was in high school, I had this truck, this 1979 Chevy long box truck. And I lived like small town, Helena, Montana. It is the capital. But you can get anywhere in Helena in about 5 minutes. So I think you guys are about 7 minutes, I think, anywhere here in Cedar Rapids. So you do have a speed in that way. But I would get up, and it's so cold that I didn't want to wait for my truck to warm up to totally defrost, and I can't be late for school. And so here, all this memories of like high school are coming back to me, and I'm like, oh no, Nate's gonna be mad at me. I'm gonna be like 5 minutes late, and I'm gonna get a tick of tardy on my resume here. So I did what I did in high school. I'm not proud of it, but this is what I did. I turned on my defrost as high as I could, and I waited until I could see about this much, and I just kind of did one of these until I got 3 or 4 miles down the road, and then everything was safe. But I know you know what that's like. I know that you high schoolers here are doing that. Hey, don't tell your parents, but we know that that's what happens. So, as I mentioned, I'm from Montana. Beautiful, beautiful place. Cold. Similar. Very cold. My dad grew up on the border of Montana and North Dakota. He was from a big family. He was the oldest of 9 children. My grandparents were really poor. They moved to a small little town outside of Great Falls, Montana, and that's where he was raised, went to high school. My dad and my uncles, they were all the altar boys. It was a good Catholic community, and so they would get up in the mornings and they would participate in the Mass. They knew exactly which wine the priest preferred during the communion. They all had the flavors that were there, and so my dad's whole experience growing up was a part of the church. My dad graduated from high school. He went to a private Catholic university in the capital city of Helena, Montana. He graduated with a degree in accounting. He served for a couple of years in the Vietnam War in Japan, fixing accounts. He didn't see any combat time. And then after that, he came back to Montana, and he started his own business. He meets my mom, who's from New York, and they have my brother a couple of years after they're married. During that time, there was a struggle, lots of pressure, lots of tension. Small business owner, new family, new marriage. And then I come along, just 15 months after my brother. And they went to get me baptized in the Catholic Church, but the priest could tell that they were in trouble, that their marriage was on the rocks, that they were struggling, that they might not make it. And so he suggests to them, when they come to ask me about being baptized, or to ask about me getting baptized in the church, they said, you need to go to this marriage encounter retreat. You guys are in trouble. Your marriage might not make it. What good is it if your son gets baptized, but you get divorced and you grow up and he grows up with mom and dad living in different places? So my mom and dad go to this marriage retreat, and it was at this marriage retreat now, my dad in his late 20s, and he says he experiences Jesus' presence for the very first time. Amazing. Here he was a part of organized religion for all these years, and now all of a sudden he's at this retreat and he says, Jesus was real to me. And I think it's very important for us this morning that as we think about what missions work is, as we look at these very powerful little presentations like the one that we just saw, as you hear from people that work all across the world, as you hear statistics like 42% of the people have access to hearing who Jesus is, that we kind of just separate all those things for just a second and we try to bring back the very personal aspect of who Jesus is. Because this morning, this isn't just about this church's mission. And this isn't just about the organization that we serve in. This isn't just about a project that is trying to get to unreached people groups. This is about the desire of Jesus and what he wants and what's important to him. And we want to put the personal back in the purpose. We want to make this about who it's about. And the main character in the story is not me. And the main character in the story is not you, but the main character is Jesus. And this is something that he is asking us to do. So I don't want to get confused and think to myself, I got to go do this because this is what the organization wants me to do. I got to put my strategy together. I got to put together all my plans and charts and spreadsheets, and I'm going to go out there and we're going to knock out this task. It's different than that. It's not that, because it's personal. It's about Jesus making himself known to people. It's about the beauty of what we experienced this morning as we're worshiping him and our hands are in the air and we're saying, Jesus, I want you more than anything else. And I think he's there and he's looking down and he's saying, I want this. And I'm so thankful that I get this from my friends and my family that are in Cedar Rapids, but I want this from the people that are around this world. I want this from the people that are in India and the Middle East and Africa and throughout Europe. That's what Jesus wants. He wants us to be with him. So I want to just share a scripture with you this morning, one that's very familiar. Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 through 20. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of read it. But as we do, we want to just turn up the volume a little bit, not on me speaking, because I hope that this is good. Because we did that sound check, and I drove with my frosty window here. So we don't need to mess with that. But what we want to turn the volume up on is when we read this text, we want to think about the personal aspects. We want to think about the things that show who Jesus is, his nature, his personality. We really want those things to be seen. So we want to pay attention to those as we read this. Jesus has been crucified. He's risen now, and his disciples have not seen him for a while. They haven't seen him since Gethsemane when they fled. Now he's crucified, been in the grave for 3 days, and now he's risen from the dead. And he says in verse 16 that the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee to the mountain which Jesus had designated. It's like somehow or another, Jesus had made this plan with his disciples. If something happens, you know where to meet. Go back to Galilee. There's a mountaintop there. That's where we're going to meet. And I like this because it reminds me of growing up in the 90s. If you're a Generation X or older, you get this. Like all the millennials are like, I don't get what. But everybody else is like, yeah, we totally get that. You make a plan and you stick to the plan, right? I mean, when you were growing up in the 80s and the 90s and you were wanting to meet your friends at the mall, what did you tell them? Meet me at Bob's Pizza at 2 p.m. And then what did your friends do? They went to Bob's Pizza at 2 p.m. I mean, today, like my kids send me messages all the time, changing the plan all the time. So I love that Jesus is able to set this plan with his disciples, and you know what? They follow through with it. So they all go to this place, and I think it's important, too, for us to recognize that not only in this moment is Jesus alive, not only is Jesus like speaking, but here he is, he's able to make plans. Jesus has plans not just for you, but he has plans for what he wants to see accomplished in this world. And the beauty of this text is Jesus inviting his disciples to be a part of the plan. And as they're listening to what it is that he's speaking, they're included in that. And so when we're talking about somebody who's alive, like we're talking about Jesus, because he's no longer in the grave, he's not just the spirit, but here he is. He's resurrected, standing before his disciples, able to speak to them. We want to make sure that we give Jesus that same spot inside of our life. Jesus, I'm listening to you. If you're there, I want to hear what it is that you have. So in verse 16, that's what happens. The disciples wind up going back to the mountain that Jesus had designated for them. And then they fell down and they worshiped him. When they saw him, they worshiped him, and some of them were doubtful. So again, we're coming back to this very personal aspects of who Jesus is. They see him. Again, he's alive. And I don't want to talk about Jesus as if he's some sort of detached person that I can't have access to. I don't want to talk to him about somebody who I heard about from a friend. No, I know who he is. And we want to differentiate between Jesus as a person who is alive and who speaks versus Jesus as the founder of a religion, or Jesus as the initiator of Christianity, or Jesus as a historical figure. Yes, he did those things, but he's alive and he speaks to us today. And so here's the disciples. They come before him and they see him and they recognize him for who he is. And so we're seeing this, the foundation being laid as Jesus is about to tell his disciples what it is that he wants them to do next. But the first is they come to him and he's alive. And he is who he says he is. He is the resurrected king. And they're realizing, okay, you're not quite exactly what we thought you were going to be. We're still subjects to the Roman Empire. You didn't deliver us in that way. But what you did is so beyond what we could have imagined because you conquered death. We saw you were dead. You were in the grave. And now you're alive. You are who you said you were. You are the king of this world. You are the rightful Messiah. And we are going to worship and we're going to glorify you. And these are the foundational pieces for each and every one of us as we start to process, what does it mean for me to be a part of Jesus's global mission? What does it mean for me to be a part of his purpose and his plan for people around this world that don't have access to him? And it begins right here. Listening to him and then recognizing him for who he is. Man, I was encouraged by all you the youth that were here this morning. That's just beautiful. I love it. And it did. It reminded me of like when I was growing up and I had that desire more than anything else inside of me. I wanted to follow after Jesus. That's what I wanted. I wanted him more than anything else. I was 14 years old when I decided I was going to follow him. It was right before my freshman year of high school. And I can say very proudly that I wasn't the type of guy that followed Jesus on Wednesday and Sunday and kind of, made a few mistakes on the weekend and got things right Sunday morning. It wasn't that. I wanted Jesus more than anything else. I wanted him more than I wanted to be popular. I wanted him more than I wanted to have girlfriends. I wanted him more than all those things. And I'm so thankful for that. Keep that same fire. Keep him as that king in your life. And for any of us, no matter what stage of life, I still feel that now. Now I'm a long ways away. Now my kids are sitting in this position that you guys are in. And here I am. I'm closer to the end than I was to the beginning, unfortunately. But I still want him more than I want anything else. And I give him that place in my life every single day. Jesus, you are the king of my life. And so, recognize him for who he is. He starts now. Now we can see some of these actions again, okay? We got this Jesus who's alive and he's making plans. And then it says in verse 18, Jesus came up. Okay, we're gonna look at these three different verbs that Jesus says. He came. He came to his disciples. Now you can imagine what they would have been feeling at this time, right? When was the last time they saw him? Gethsemane. And they're probably a little bit embarrassed just that they were like nodding off when Jesus was praying back into Gethsemane. But that's nothing compared to what happened after the crowd came to arrest Jesus. And what did they do in that moment? And they dispersed. They ran away. They got out of there. And now they're meeting back with Jesus. And they know that he's the king. They know that he's this glorified, resurrected Savior. But how is Jesus going to respond to them after the last action that they had with him was pretty much a fail? And Jesus comes to them. So powerful. That Jesus is the one that takes the step to be with them. He doesn't wait for them to come and grovel, to kneel before him. He doesn't wait for them to crawl on their knees saying, please, please forgive us. He takes the step to them. That's the God that we serve. That's who Jesus is. And so no matter where you're at in life and maybe what direction things have taken, it might not be the way that you planned. And you might look back and be like, man, I've really made some mistakes and taken some detours and not gotten there. And Jesus is here this morning, and you know what he does? He comes to you. He takes that step to you because he wants to be with you. You are valuable to him. Not just because of what you can do, not because of what you give. You are valuable to him, just like these disciples were. They were valuable to him. He knew them. He loved them. He was with them for years, and he wanted to see them again, and he takes that step just throwing any concerns or worries or fears that they may have had. Is he going to take me back? Yes, he is. Jesus came to them. Then after he comes to them, he says, well, I think it's Jesus speaks. I think he says it in a couple of different ways. He says, he spoke to them. Keying in on this idea that God is the one that speaks. And then he reiterates and clarifies what it is that he's saying. He says he comes to them, and then he spoke, and then he says. And it's like we reiterate, or he says this a couple of different ways, and probably to make the point that, yes, not only does Jesus speak, but he also is able to clarify what it is that he wants people to do. He's able to explain things. He's able to teach things. And so we're looking at these things that Jesus has done. What is he? He's this resurrected king who's alive and who speaks and who can teach and clarify what it is that he wants us to do. That's the foundation as we go into the Great Commission. And we might be thinking of something like this, and we're like, okay, now what do I do with that? Like, what am I supposed to do with the Great Commission? Go into all the world and preach the gospel, baptize in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And behold, I am with you until the very end of the age. I mean, that's the next few verses. But as you and I here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 2022, what am I supposed to do with something like that? How can I be a part of what it is that Jesus is doing around the world? And I think as we look through the scripture, we see this often. We look at who God is. Like he is the main character of this entire story. From Genesis to Revelation, it's about him. And there's some great characters that come in, but this story is about God. It's about him. It's about his character, how we see who he is in so many of the different stories that are told. We see so many great attributes of him. We see his nature throughout these stories. And then we see in the stories God's relationship to us, to humanity. And it's throughout the entire Bible. And it's so beautiful to look at that from start to finish, this story is about this incredible God who actually wants to be with the people that he created. Amazing. It's wonderful. And so as we look at the story, we see the way that God treats us. We see what God does for me, and then that then becomes my cue, and that becomes the model for me of how I treat other people. I think we could look at this as a way of forming our own social ethics. How do I treat the people around me? Well, I treat the people around me the way that God treated me. So why do I forgive others? Because he forgave me. Why should I be kind to other people? Well, he's kind to me. Why should I give other people value and respect? Because that's what he gave to me. And so the answer to what we do with the Great Commission begins with this. We're seeing who God is. We're seeing the way that he now interacted with his disciples. We're seeing the way that he interacts with you. And now we have some answers for ourselves in how we can move forward. Because what did Jesus do? He came to his disciples. And so if he came to them, what is it that means for us? It means we go. He came, and now we go. It begins with us. We're now mirroring and reflecting what it is that he's asked for us. And so, when I was 14, I mentioned I decided that I wanted to follow after Jesus, and I did. When I went to college, I felt this desire to go to India, and so I spent 10 weeks in the country. Loved it. Beautiful, beautiful place. I loved how everything in India was a bit of an adventure. Getting breakfast in the morning seemed like it was an adventure. Seeing guys on the side of the street pouring hot tea, and they're letting it cool as they pick their arm up from the glass in the kettle. I loved how taking taxis and trains, everything about it was exciting for me. But the thing that I most enjoyed was I had the opportunity to tell people about Jesus who had never, ever heard about him before. We were going to some pretty isolated little villages during that summer, and many people had never seen Jesus. And so I knew this is what I wanted to do. This is what God is asking me to do and putting that in my heart. And so I made plans that after I graduated from college that I would go back and spend time in India. At the same time, my wife, when she was a little girl, she was 12 years old. She was at a youth camp, and she had some pretty difficult things that were happening when she was a younger girl. She went up to respond in prayer at a youth camp. And while she was there, Jesus has put this picture of this little girl in her mind. It was a little Indian girl. And so from the time my wife was 12 years old, she always wanted to go. It was like my wife saw this empty chair. You know, we have this concept here that we've been talking about. We've got this chair, and it represents somebody that isn't at the party, somebody that's not welcome at the table. We want to fill that chair. And my wife saw that little girl, and it was everything inside of her wanted to help little girls and people in India join Jesus's community. So we were married and we wound up coming to India. And as I mentioned, we wound up living in this area of India where very few people know about Jesus. It's not a massive area. It's not one of the most densely populated parts of India. But we live in places where if you go to the villages, they've never, ever heard about Jesus before. And if you mention Jesus, they don't know if you're talking about a celebrity, an athlete. They don't know if you're just saying that's who your name is. They've never heard about him before. And so not only have these people never even heard about Jesus, but these people have never even seen a white guy before. I mean, this would trip them out being in Cedar Rapids. They'd be like, oh my gosh, look at all the white people, right? And so not only have they not seen that, but that means I'm usually the best looking white guy that they've ever seen. I like that. That's why Pastor Nate's welcome to come with me anytime he wants. But we go to those people. We go. That's the step we take. We go. One of the things that we've been involved in since being in India is we stepped into the lives of 24 boys and girls that had been orphaned, abandoned, or abused. It was not something that we planned on, or that it was just not something that we thought was going to happen, but we had to intervene in the lives of these kids. And the same way, here are these people that are in need. Here are these young kids that have nobody to look after them and protect them. And in the same way that Jesus has looked after and cared for us, I want to take that step and I want to go to other people. So that's the first thing. Think about it. What does it mean? What am I supposed to do? Where do I go? I'm not asking you to come to India, but if you do want to come, be happy to have a conversation with you. Or if maybe there's another place around this world that God is speaking to you, again, you can come and talk to us. We are really all working together here because the goal isn't just for people to come to India. Really, we want to see people around the world come to know Jesus. And so if you're interested or you're feeling Jesus speaking to you, come and just talk after service, and I can make sure that we get you connected into like a pipeline and have the opportunity then to connect with other people throughout this unreached parts of the world where we have different teams that are ministering in different ways. So after Jesus comes, now he's telling the disciples to go, and then he's telling the disciples to go and preach. Now, I don't usually like to use the word preach just because it kind of has this connotation that you have to go get some sort of training or you have to wind up being qualified to do that. And I think it distracts from the personal aspect of what we're trying to communicate. Because you know Jesus. Each and every one of you has that relationship with him. Now you also know other people. You might know your neighbors across the street or friends or coworkers. You know them. And I don't think you need to think, put the burden on yourself. I got to preach and I got to have my 3 sermon points and I got to set them straight. Preaching has this way of creating a right and wrong mentality. Because if I'm preaching, that means what? I'm right. And if I'm right, what does that mean about you? You're wrong. And usually that just ends up with a lot of this, I don't think we're really getting anywhere with that. But if we think about it in the relational sense, okay, we got a God who's alive and a God that speaks. And you're alive and you speak, and your friends are alive and they speak. Now, what are we doing here? You are telling your friends about this other person. You are just making an introduction. And I think that if we would just allow ourselves to operate in a much more natural way, then Jesus is going to be a little bit more accurately communicated, and it's going to give him the opportunity also to make himself known to others. Think about this, introducing Jesus to others. We've been real blessed over the last few years in India. We have started a couple of businesses that have helped us just connect to all types of people now. I used to go out into different villages, and I'm meeting people now. I sit there in my hometown and can drink a coffee in the coffee shop that we made, and I can meet more people throughout the day just doing that. But some of these friends, they're like what we call all-day friends. I mean, they're not the type of people that you can just like have a 30-minute conversation with. I mean, when they invite you over to their home, you're there for the rest of the day. You just got to prepare for it. They're all-day friends. But we want to not just introduce others, we want to speak to them. We want them to see what it means to follow after Jesus and be a part of his community. We want people to see it in the way that we live with one another. And so when we set up these businesses, we're thinking to ourselves, how is it that through this business we can glorify and we can reflect Jesus and who he is? So we do that in a lot of different ways through our social responsibility, our environmental responsibility. We want people to see Jesus in our relationships with each other. So there's this young guy that came to us a couple of years ago. His name's Rakesh, and Rakesh was born in Mumbai, one of the most populated, densely populated cities in the world, 30 million people. And one day, when he was about 6 years old, his parents just disappeared. He was left on the side of the street. And Rakesh grew up on the street almost his entire life. But then there's a wonderful organization, Teen Challenge. Some of you may have heard of this. There's a Teen Challenge in Mumbai, and they will often take street kids into their program. And so when he was a little bit older, like in his teenage years, he was brought into this Teen Challenge program, and he spent several years there. He's obviously malnourished, uneducated. He's about 5 feet tall. He can hardly read. He can hardly write. But he's got such a nice, wonderful personality. And so he winds up coming to Bhimtal, which is the place where my wife and I live. And he got a job at our cafe. And so Rakesh is, for the very first time, he's kind of like now in this work environment, and he's not being taken advantage of, and he's getting paid a salary, and he's got work hours, because before he didn't know how much he was supposed to get paid. He didn't know how many hours he was supposed to work. He didn't know that he was supposed to be given dignity and respect in the workplace. He didn't know that people should actually talk to him in a nice way. He had no idea that that's the way the world works. And now he comes to this place and he's treated with respect and dignity and he's in fairness and he's getting a living wage. So he's been working with us for several years. And it was earlier in this year where Rakesh came up to me and he's got he's like emotional. And he's got like tears in his eyes. And he's saying, brother, I've been working here for 3 years. And all I do is I wash the dishes and I just serve the customers. And I'm like, yeah, Rakesh, but you're doing so good at that. And he's like, I just don't want to always have to wash the dishes and I don't want to have to talk to the customers. And I was like, well, what is it that you want to learn how to do? And he goes, if I could just learn, it's my dream. I just want to learn how to make the pizzas. And I thought, wow, if only everybody's dreams were this easy to make come true. Rakesh is now working in the pizza making station. We want people to see who Jesus is in the way that we treat one another. And then he kind of clarifies to his disciples, what does it mean? I want you to go. I want you to introduce people to me. And I want you to invite them into my community. That's what he's telling his disciples to do. And I think we can do that. We can go. We can introduce somebody to Jesus. We can invite them to be a part of Jesus' community. We can teach them what it means to be a part of the family. We can welcome them into this chair right here. We have that very open mentality in our lives. We let people come into our home throughout the day. There's never a day where I don't have people just walking through my home. We have different times of devotions and gatherings where people will sit on the floor and will drink tea with one another, talk, worship Jesus, hear stories about him. That's what we're doing. We're welcoming people to sit in this chair. I have a friend. Let me before we tell this, final story. I'm very proud of some of the young boys and the young girls that grew up in the children's home that we had to take responsibility over several years ago that I mentioned. Now, they grow up. They're adults. I've got 2 right now that are in the UK. I've got 1 that's working on a church planting team in Laos. I've got another that just graduated this weekend with her degree in nursing. She's going to join one of our church planting teams in New Delhi. And I have a couple that are with me right now, and we're going to start a second cafe, and they're going to go to this new location, and they're going to work at building Jesus' community there. So it's amazing that people who have heard about Jesus, seen who he is, are now taking up that same responsibility and saying, I want to do that same thing. I want to go. I want to introduce people to Jesus, and I want to invite him to be a part of Jesus' community. That's what Jesus' Great Commission is all about. So my neighbor, he's a really intelligent guy. And so, in fact, he's a businessman, he's an entrepreneur, he's not educated, but he winds up doing polyhouses or greenhouses, and he can take a few plants and he can propagate them and sell thousands and thousands of them. That's just what he's really, really gifted at. And he's from this very, very poor village. The one time that I went to his village, while I was eating lunch, my wife had to hold a stick so that the monkeys wouldn't take the food off of my plate. I mean, it was just very, very primitive in so many ways with the way that he's living. And so now he's come to the town that we live in because the climate's really favorable for greenhouses. And he's just done really, really good for himself over the last few years. But when we met him about 6 years ago, he was still in the struggle phase of life. And he bought himself a motorcycle so that he could wind up taking on more projects throughout the town. And one morning he woke up and his motorcycle was stolen. It was just devastating for this guy. He's in debt. I mean, he owed money to the bank to pay for this, and now the bike is gone. How much is the insurance going to give him? Not as much as what he lost. But they did give him a little bit. And so he bought himself a second motorcycle. And so then he asked us if he could park the motorcycle at the gate at the girls' home, because there's a gate there in front of the girls' home that I mentioned. So we let him park his bike there. And in the evenings, we would sit together around the little fire when it was cold, and we would drink tea with one another, and he would hear stories about Jesus. Well, during that time, his wife was pregnant, and they had a son, and then they had a couple miscarriages, and now she's pregnant again. And so it's a little bit of a high-risk situation. They've already lost a couple of babies. And so they have a hospital that they've already identified. They're going to go there. The OBGYN is going to deliver the baby, and everything is set. So he calls me up one morning about 6 a.m., and he's like, my wife went into labor last night. Can you give us a ride down to the hospital? Now, the hospital from us is about an hour away. And so I'm excited to do this, happy to do this. So we jump in my car and we drive down to the hospital, and we go to this birthing clinic where they had been talking to the OBGYN. And the nurses they're really not really being real clear with us. They're kind of ho-humming around, not telling us exactly what's going on. But we're sitting there, and they're not admitting her. They're not letting us talk to the doctor. They're giving us zero information. And after kind of pushing them, after a few minutes, they tell us, well, you know, the OBGYN went on vacation yesterday. And there's nobody here to do this because this is kind of high risk and none of us want to take the risk. So I'm sorry, you can't have your baby here. She's been in labor for 3 hours at this point. So we wind up driving to the government hospital. But the government hospital will actually give you money when your child is born there. They will give you a higher amount of money if you're female, if your girl child is born there. So we're in the parking lot though, and she's in labor. She's just trying to hold it together. And pretty much the only words I heard her say most of the day were, I'm not going to have my baby in that hospital because the nurses slap the women when they cry during childbirth. And I mean, I can't argue with that. So then we drive to the third hospital. And we get to this third hospital, and he runs in there. And now we're kind of all a little bit on edge. And I'm thinking to myself, am I going to deliver a baby in the backseat of this car? I mean, that's like... It wasn't on my bucket list, but okay. So he runs in and he comes back out after a few minutes, and now he's the husband. He's just tense. He's like, this is going to cost me 3 times the amount that I have saved up to do it in this hospital. What do we do? So I call my wife, who calls a friend, and then they give a recommendation to another hospital, and I call up that next hospital, and I ask them a couple questions. And I'm sure you already know what those are. Is the OBGYN there? Check. Okay, next. How much is this going to cost? And it was right at his budget. So we wound up taking him to this 4th hospital now. And we get there, and they're going to have to do a cesarean delivery. And in the hospitals, they don't provide blood. You have to bring your own blood. So in order to get blood, you got to go to the blood bank, and you can give a pint of your own blood, and you can get a pint of the blood type that you need. So we leave the wife there, and me and the husband, we go to this 5th hospital, this blood bank, and he gives a pint of his blood, and then they give a pint that matches his wife's blood type. And the guy comes out of the little refrigerated room there, and he says, "You want to keep this blood warm." And so he hands that to my friend, and then my friend hands it to me, and he says, "Keep this warm." You know, I'm pretty invested in this day. So I'm driving my car. I've been to 5 hospitals, and I got a stranger's blood underneath my jacket as I'm driving. And we're on the way back, and he says, "You know, I've heard your stories. I've heard you tell about Jesus, but today it's as if I'm seeing Jesus for the very first time. It's as if he's speaking to me." And I said, "You know what, Boudsain? You're right. He is. Because Jesus' spirit is inside of me, and he is speaking to you, and he wants to be with you." And since that time, Boudsain and his family have been a part of what we're doing and been a part of Jesus' community. And it's the simplicity of this, just going as Jesus came, introducing as Jesus spoke, and inviting people to be a part of this as Jesus did. So Jonathan, if you guys are here, I want us to pray for just a moment. But before we do, I want us to just think, Jesus, what is it that you have for me? How can I be a part of this mission and this plan? How can I bring the personal back to this purpose? What can I do that's simple and small today? Speak to me, Jesus. You're the God that's alive, and you are the God that speaks. Jesus, we come before you this morning, and we just thank you. We thank you, we thank you, we thank you, because you are the treasure of our lives. You're the greatest good that any of us could have, and we are with you. You came to us, not that we came to you. You came to us, and you spoke to us, and you forgave us, and you've given us relationship with you, and you've given us our brothers and our sisters in this room that we can be a part of your community. We are blessed beyond measure. And our hearts this morning are now directed towards those that don't have that. They don't have you as the treasure. They don't know how great you are. They don't know how good it is to be with you. They don't experience the peace that you and I experience. They don't experience the feelings of forgiveness. God, how can we be a part of introducing them to you? How can we be a part of seeing little girls around this world who've been devalued have the opportunity to meet you? How can we be a part of speaking and introducing you to those that live in closed, difficult to live in countries? You're the God that speaks, and we're your people that are listening this morning. How can we obey your commission? How can we invite people to these chairs that are empty?